Hi everyone, my name is Stacy Hubert and my presentation is about sociolinguistics and the language acquisition theory by Fodor. So, what are sociolinguistics? And sociolinguistics includes social learning perspectives that really put an emphasis on social interactions in the development of knowledge and learning. So, these social influences and interactions are important to literacy learning. Many factors affect language and literacy development, including cultural and ethnic backgrounds, education, and social classes as well. Um, and sociolinguistics is rooted in three different fields: anthropology, linguistics, and literary analysis. So, within anthropology, reading and writing can be seen as cultural events which affect the social practices. In linguistics, language differences between social classes are connected to differences in language practices. So, linguistics, it also added that the ability to read is connected to social functioning. So children learn to read and write to achieve their own personal goals. And finally, literary analysis is when during that reading process, meaning and understanding are within the reader themselves. And the dominant people for sociolinguistics, there were many different types of theorists and theories under the whole umbrella scope of sociolinguistics. So the one we start off with the sociolinguistic theory by Bernstein, sociocultural theory with Bronfenbrenner and Moll, social constructivism with Vygotsky, social learning theory, Bandura, the critical literacy theory with Freire, critical race theory by Ladson Billings, and multiliteracy um, theory with Langshear and Noble, and also with the New London Group. And within this scope of the umbrella of sociolinguistics, there are so many different theories and theorists under this umbrella, but um, the learning, they share a lot of similar ideas and points. So there are distinct differences among them. So within this presentation, we're really going to be focusing on the sociolinguistic theory with Bernstein. So, what is the sociolinguistic theory? And according to Tracy and Morrow, in short, the sociolinguistic theory derives from the social learning perspectives that underscore the role of language in reading acquisition and reading ability. So he emphasized how important social interactions are for student and children literacy development. Language is learned from social interactions with one another, which can then be applied to their daily communication and literacy learning. So there is a really strong relationship with the language you are able to use and your part and role in the society. And according to the sociolinguistic theory, because language is learned from social interactions, that's where cultural, ethnic, and educational backgrounds, along with social classes, play a major role in language acquisition. And as a result of this, these backgrounds lead to differences in the social interactions among students and children, which then affect differences in literacy abilities within the classroom. And how has this influenced instructional practices? This theory influences instructional practices throughout the years and for future classrooms to come. So, as educators, we implement and encourage student interaction and collaboration because we can see how students benefit from one another. We see this during their turn and talks, when they peer edit and revise their papers or their writing activities, when they're playing simply at recess or just playing a fun classroom game, when they're eating at lunch, when they're just chatting in the morning in the hallway when they come to school, and so on. We are also influenced by this theory to ensure that we include support and scaffolding for all learners to be successful. We know that every single student comes from a different cultural or ethnic background, educational background, and they might come from a different type of social class, which can really impact their literacy learning in the classroom. Additionally, this theory builds students' oral development and enhances their vocabulary as well. And a few classroom applications. Tracy and Morrow provided these amazing classroom applications. The language experience chart, which is on the right at the top. It's a shared experience anchor chart that students add to as a whole class. So it has reading, writing, and then rereading that same chart builds literacy development. And the teacher prompts questions, and she can have teaching points when calling on students to when they share. So how would I start this sentence? What goes at the end of this sentence? How do I make sure I'm spelling this word correctly? How can I make sure? And then along with that, the teacher can accept an answer as it is when a student shares it, or can build on that response to strengthen that sentence to make it more thought out or more detailed. Another idea, which I have done plenty of times, are morning messages. And a morning message is collaboration between students and the teacher to write a morning message about the day or activities. And something that I did during when I was in intermediate as well as in primary, I had multiple different types of messages for my students to help me add on to and build on. So like during guided reading, we would go over the must-dos and the may-dos, and they would help anchor our ideas and tasks on there. And they would always go back to refer to it, and then they would reread it and make sure they're following the directions, which in turn then is building on their literacy development by rereading it and understanding it and comprehending it. So just like the second bullet point says, the teacher can refer back to the message throughout the day, which build and strengthens reading for meaning and understanding. So they go back and reread to make sure they understand what is expected of them, so they can make sure and be able to comprehend what the tasks are. And another classroom application would be literature circles, which I have done during a literacy acceleration class for my second graders, as well as doing this in fifth grade. Literature circles are social learning experiences with a small or large group of students by sharing experiences, personal backgrounds, and thoughts and feelings. It also has an emphasis on how students can build off each other's thoughts and ideas socially and build oral and auditory development. So when they are listening to each other, they are comprehending and listening to what their peer says, as well as then building onto that person's response or reflecting on their answer to see whether they agree or disagree, and just continuing to build that social development and building on those vocabulary words and words that they might not be exposed to at home, and things like that. And moving on to the next theory, which is called the language acquisition theory, or the language of thought hypothesis. And the theorist is Jerry Fodor, and he developed the language of thought hypothesis. He believed that everyone is born with a mental language, which is called mentalese, or language of thought. So within this mental language, it can contain syntax and vocabulary. It's as if our thoughts are written as sentences in our brain before we say them out loud as well. So you're building these sentences in your brain and thinking about them and constructing these sentences, and then you're either sharing it out loud or just keeping it in your brain. This theory demonstrates that our brains have a language-like structure, and it contains grammatical rules and or patterns to combine words to create these types of sentences. So within the language of thought, that inner language contains all the concepts and representations that we can ever learn, think, or express. This theory supports the idea that words match with an experience or physical meaning in a child's mind to acquire language. So for example, a student might be thinking in their brain, oh, they see Johnny and they say Johnny is short. So within that person's mind, they're thinking of the person first, Johnny, who's the subject or the noun, and then they're describing what they see. And he's expressing the description of him with the ending thought within the predicate. So saying how Johnny is short. So combining these sentences instead of saying Johnny, short. And when someone's thinking about this sentence, they're looking at Johnny and they're processing this sentence or this idea and putting it into a complete sentence. So that's that mental language that Fodor talks about. The dominant person for this theory for language of thought hypothesis was Jerry A. Fodor in 1975. Fodor was an influential philosopher of literature, and he had an impact on the cognitive sciences along with the philosophy of the mind. He defended the representational theory of the mind as well. It is a cognitive symbol for something that an individual may not have experienced. Therefore, they create an image or thought as to what it would look, sound, or feel like. So, for example, for my own experience, I have never experienced an earthquake. And because I've never experienced it, I come up with this mental in my mind. I'm thinking about, okay, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it sound like as the things that I know about it? And by just thinking about what an earthquake is. So I'm coming up with this idea about, because since I've never experienced it, I have to think about how I would represent an earthquake in my mind to kind of see how I would experience that type of event. So how has the language of thought hypothesis influenced instructional practices? This theory influences instructional practices to this day. We ask our students typically to, sometimes paint a picture in their brain as to what they are reading about, to visualize a story and comprehend it. Oftentimes, we ask our students to create images in their brain to go with a vocabulary word, to remember that meaning and definition of it, to make those connections within their mind. When thinking of ELL students, educators have their students think about what they want to say first in their brain and create images in their brain and put them on paper, or find ways to create a sentence as to what they really want to try to share out. Therefore, they think first and process the language in their minds first, and then they share it out loud. So the language of thought influences our practices when we ask our students a problem in any subject area, really. They must process the question or problem in their mind, think through the process in order to find a solution. So while they're doing that, they're using their mental language to develop a type of response that solves or answers the problem. So during activities, I typically have my students think first before sharing a response during turn and talks. They're using that mental language or the language of thought to process how they want to share their answer aloud. I'm always typically, when I have my students on the carpet and we're thinking about a turn and talk before they share, I always have them sit and think first. And once they have thought about what they want to say to their partner, they show me a symbol with their hand or a hand gesture, and then they share it out, and it's in complete sentences. They really thought about their idea and details. If I just had them start sharing right away, I feel like their ideas or thoughts might be, discombobulated and not be well thought out as much as how I have them think first in their mind about how they'd want to answer this and then share it out loud. So, yeah. And then classroom applications for the language of thought. There's mental imagery. So during read alouds, students, so I'm sometimes either having the read aloud under the book, under the projector that we have for our school, where if it's a chapter book, they don't really have pictures, so they have to create their own connections and have that thought process take place of how they would perceive the characters and the events. Sight words, vocabulary, some phrases would be, with figurative language. So thinking about when it's raining cats and dogs, what does that actually mean? Are they raining cats and dogs, or is it just really stormy outside? So making those type of connections as well within their mind. And then visualization reading strategy. So that happens during shared reading, guided reading, or independent reading. This type of reading strategy helps students create an image in their brain to connect to the words that they're reading, so they can read for understanding. So they're visualizing it, they're processing it in their mind, and then they want to then connect those images to sentences in their brains to then build that comprehension skill and build that language acquisition. And these are the references that I used with my email at the bottom. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And thank you guys.